The room was packed, the cameras were rolling, and the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Every journalist in the briefing room had one goal: grill J.D. Vance until they got the soundbite they wanted. But Andrea Holt, she wasn't here just to ask questions. She was here to take him down. This was her moment, the one she had been waiting for. She had done it before. Backed politicians into corners, forced them into awkward stumbles, ripped them apart with carefully crafted questions that left them exposed. Today, J.D. Vance was her target. She leaned forward, microphone in hand, her voice sharp and calculated. "Mr. Vice President, given your past comments on government aid, how do you justify?" That's as far as she got. J.D. Vance didn't hesitate. He didn't stutter, didn't fumble, didn't give her the slightest opening. Instead, he did something no one expected. He shut her down so completely, so surgically, that the entire room went silent. It wasn't just a response, it was a moment. The look on Andrea Holt's face said it all. Shock, disbelief, and something else. Something she had never felt in her career. She had lost control. The master interrogator had just been outmaneuvered, in front of the entire country. And the media? They weren't ready for what happened next. Because J.D. Vance didn't just answer the question, he dismantled the entire premise. With cold, hard facts, with an unshakable confidence, he turned the moment into something completely unexpected. He didn't just defend himself, he exposed the media's game, flipped the narrative on its head, and left Andrea Holt scrambling for words. The reporters in the room exchanged glances. Some scribbled furiously, others just sat there, stunned. This wasn't how these exchanges were supposed to go. A liberal journalist challenging a conservative leader, that was supposed to be predictable. The politician was supposed to sweat, to dodge, to try and talk his way out. But J.D. Vance had just rewritten the script. And Andrea Holt? She had no comeback, no sharp retort, no carefully crafted counter-question, just silence. The clip went viral. Within minutes, headlines exploded across social media. J.D. Vance flips the script on Andrea Holt, media stunned. Liberal reporter tries to corner Vance, instant regret. It was the kind of moment that doesn't just trend, it reshapes the conversation. But here's the real question. What exactly did J.D. Vance say that left her speechless? And why did this moment hit so much harder than any political exchange before it? Because this wasn't just about one press conference. This was about something much bigger, a power shift, a battle that had been brewing for years, one that was now exploding into full view. And as the world dissected the exchange, one thing became clear. J.D. Vance had just changed the game. But how did we get here? Why was this confrontation inevitable? And what made this moment so different from all the others? To understand the full impact, we need to go back to the years of tension, back to the history between J.D. Vance and Andrea Holt, back to the battles that led to this final showdown. Before this jaw-dropping moment at the press conference, before J.D. Vance left Andrea Holt speechless in front of the entire nation, there was a deeper war unfolding, one that had been brewing for years between the media and political outsiders, like Vance. To understand why this moment shook the political world, we have to rewind. This was not just another exchange between a politician and a journalist. No, this was personal. This was history repeating itself. But this time, the ending was different. J.D. Vance wasn't your typical vice president. He didn't come from wealth, didn't grow up in political circles, and didn't have the polished background of Washington elites. He was raised in Middletown, Ohio, a town where factories shut down, families struggled to put food on the table, and the American dream felt like a myth. His childhood wasn't just difficult, it was a war zone of addiction, poverty, and government dependency. His mother battled drug addiction, his family bounced between homes, and at one point, he wondered if he'd ever escape the cycle that trapped so many around him. The government promised solutions, but all he saw were broken systems that left people worse off. That reality shaped him. It built the fire in him that later led to his best-selling book, Hillbilly Elegy, a raw, unfiltered account of America's forgotten working class. The book exploded like a grenade in the political world. Some saw it as a much-needed wake-up call about the struggles of Middle America. Others, particularly in the liberal media, saw it as a dangerous narrative that exposed truths they didn't want people to hear. And one of those critics, Andrea Holt. Andrea Holt had built her career in the media by being fearless, relentless, and to some, ruthless. She had a special talent for cornering conservative politicians, pushing them into defensive mode, and making headlines out of their stumbles. She wasn't just another reporter, she was a star, the face of primetime political analysis, the journalist politicians feared getting into a verbal battle with. She had taken down senators, governors, even former presidents with her sharp, unrelenting questioning. And she had her sights set on J.D. Vance long before he ever became vice president. Their history went back years. When Hillbilly Elegy came out, Holt was one of its loudest critics. She accused Vance of peddling dangerous populism, of romanticizing struggle while ignoring systemic issues. She painted him as someone who had escaped poverty, but wanted to slam the door shut on others. Vance, on the other hand, saw Holt as the perfect example of media elitism, someone who had never lived the struggles she talked about, yet spoke with authority on issues she would never personally face. Their feud played out in interviews, articles, and debates. The press painted Vance as a traitor to his roots, and he, in return, called them out for twisting the truth to fit a narrative. Then came the political earthquake. J.D. Vance ran for Senate and won. Suddenly he wasn't just an outsider with a best-selling book. He was a rising star in conservative politics. And then, in a shocking move that shook Washington, he was picked as the Vice President of the United States. The media was stunned. Andrea Holt was furious. The man she had spent years trying to discredit was now one of the most powerful people in the country. The tension between them only grew. Every time Holt interviewed him, she went in harder, determined to expose what she saw as contradictions in his policies. But Vance didn't back down. Unlike other politicians who danced around questions, he confronted them head-on. Their interviews became viral sensations, battles of ideology where neither side was willing to retreat. But the press conference, that was the final battle. It was supposed to be just another press briefing, but for Andrea Holt, it was something more. She saw it as her opportunity to finally dismantle J.D. Vance in front of the entire nation. She had prepared, sharpened her questions like weapons, ready to strike. She had done it before, humiliated powerful politicians, caught them in contradictions, forced them into defensive backpedaling. But she underestimated one thing. J.D. Vance was ready for her, and when she asked that fateful question, the one meant to trap him, to expose him, he didn't just answer, he flipped the entire game. The moment unfolded in real time, and the world watched as the unstoppable force of Andrea Holt finally met the immovable object of J.D. Vance. What happened next would change both of their careers forever. Andrea Holt had done this 100 times before. She had gone head-to-head with senators, governors, and even presidents, using her sharp questions like weapons. But this time, something was different. As she locked eyes with J.D. Vance, she saw something she hadn't expected. A man who wasn't afraid. The room was silent, cameras rolling, every reporter waiting for the moment she would corner him. She took a breath, adjusted her microphone, and with a smirk, delivered her first strike. Mr. Vice President, given your past opposition to certain social welfare programs, how do you justify standing here today and defending policies that directly contradict your previous statements? Isn't this just another example of political hypocrisy? It was a question designed to put him on the defensive, a landmine disguised as a simple inquiry. She expected him to hesitate, to scramble for a diplomatic answer that wouldn't trap him further. But J.D. Vance didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned forward, clasped his hands together, and with a calm, steady voice, responded, "Andrea, it's fascinating how the media picks and chooses which statements to focus on, while conveniently ignoring the larger picture. You call it hypocrisy, I call it growth. Unlike some in Washington, I don't cling to outdated ideas just to protect my ego. I learn, I adapt, and most importantly, I fight for what's best for the American people, not for a political agenda crafted in a newsroom." The air in the room shifted. Some reporters exchanged glances. Others scribbled furiously in their notepads. Andrea's smirk faltered for just a second, but she recovered quickly. "So, are you saying your previous statements were wrong?" she fired back, her voice a little sharper. J.D. Vance tilted his head, as if amused by the attempt to corner him. "I'm saying that leadership requires the ability to evolve. You and I both know that. Or do you still believe every opinion you held 10 years ago was the absolute truth? If you do, that's not integrity. That's stubbornness." Boom. The first crack in Andrea Holt's composure appeared. She knew she couldn't afford to look shaken, so she pressed on, but the room could feel it. This wasn't going the way she had planned. She shifted tactics. Time to make it personal. But isn't it convenient, Mr. Vice President, that your evolution just so happens to align with political opportunities? Some would say you're just playing the game. J.D. Vance leaned back, arms crossed, and let the silence hang in the air for just a moment before delivering his next blow. Andrea, you want to talk about political games? Let's talk about how the media operates. Every time a conservative changes their stance based on new evidence or the will of the voters, it's called hypocrisy. But when liberals flip-flop, it's called progress. Why is that? Who decided that's the rule? The silence that followed was deafening. Andrea Holt blinked. She had walked into a trap and she knew it. The audience watching at home knew it too. The clip of this exchange would soon explode across social media, and that was only the beginning. But in the room, Andrea had no choice but to keep going. She had to regain control, had to find an angle that worked. She adjusted her posture, trying to exude confidence. Let's not deflect, Mr. Vice President. This is about your record. Do you deny that your stance on welfare programs has shifted dramatically? J.D. Vance smiled. Not a defensive smile, not an irritated one, a knowing smile. Of course my stance has evolved, because I don't just sit in a newsroom analyzing theories. I meet real people. I've sat across from single mothers who work 2 jobs just to put food on the table. I've talked to veterans struggling to get the care they deserve. And you know what I realized? That policies aren't just talking points, they affect real lives. So yes, I changed my position, because that's what responsible leadership looks like. The room was silent. Andrea Holt opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. For the first time in her career, she didn't have the next move. J.D. Vance wasn't just answering her questions. He was exposing the media's entire strategy in real time. She tried one last attempt, a desperate effort to regain control. But isn't it the media's job to hold leaders accountable? J.D. Vance's expression didn't change. His voice remained calm, but his words were like a hammer striking stone. It's the media's job to report the truth, not manipulate it. Holding leaders accountable is important. Twisting narratives to fit a political agenda, that's something else entirely. And I think the American people are starting to see the difference. That was it. That was the moment. Andrea Holt had nothing left. No witty comebacks, no rehearsed deflections. Her silence spoke louder than anything she could have said. The reporters in the room sat frozen, caught between shock and admiration. Even those who disagreed with J.D. Vance knew they had just witnessed something rare. And the internet, it exploded. Clips of the exchange spread like wildfire, accumulating millions of views in mere hours. Headlines blared across every platform. J.D. Vance annihilates liberal reporter. The internet goes wild. Media bias exposed on live TV. Watch this before it gets deleted. Andrea Holt tries to corner Vance, ends up speechless. Andrea Holt's name trended for all the wrong reasons. Memes flooded Twitter. Conservative commentators celebrated J.D. Vance's takedown, while liberal analysts scrambled to control the damage. But here's the real twist. Andrea Holt didn't stay silent for long, because the next morning, she did something no one expected. She tried to spin the story. She went on a primetime news segment, claiming the clip was taken out of context, that J.D. Vance had dodged the real question, that the media was still the real victim here. But it was too late. The full clip was already everywhere. People had already seen it with their own eyes. The damage was done. J.D. Vance hadn't just won the exchange, he had exposed the game. And now, the media had a much bigger problem, because this wasn't just one viral moment. This was a shift, one that they couldn't control anymore. The internet was still on fire. Every major news outlet, social media platform, and political podcast had picked up the clip of J.D. Vance shutting down Andrea Holt's relentless questioning. But while the public reaction was clear, overwhelmingly, in favor of Vance, the deeper conversation had just begun. What had really happened in that moment? Was this just another viral media blunder? Or did it reveal something far more significant about the shifting power dynamics in American politics and journalism? Political analysts and media watchdogs immediately jumped into the debate. Conservative commentators hailed it as a masterclass in handling media bias, pointing to Vance's ability to remain calm under pressure, while systematically dismantling the liberal reporter's tactics. Ben Shapiro, known for his rapid-fire analysis, broke it down frame by frame. explaining how Vance flipped the media's own strategy against them. This wasn't just about answering tough questions, this was about exposing the media's hypocrisy in real time. Vance didn't just dodge traps, he set his own. He turned Holt's argument against her, forcing her to defend the very system she was trying to use against him. That's why she froze. She wasn't debating a politician. She was debating the truth. But the reaction wasn't just limited to conservative circles. Some independent journalists and even former liberal media figures admitted that the exchange was a disaster for Andrea Holt. Glenn Greenwald, a well-known investigative journalist, was among the first to point out a broader issue. This was never about Vance alone. This was about the crumbling credibility of mainstream media. Holt walked in expecting to control the narrative, to corner a conservative with gotcha questions. Instead, she got exposed. And the reason the internet is reacting so strongly isn't just because Vance handled himself well. It's because people are sick of the game. That statement struck a nerve, because it wasn't just one viral moment. It was part of a larger trend. People had watched this pattern play out too many times before. A conservative guest is invited onto a mainstream platform, only to be ambushed, with leading questions misrepresented, and then used as a political punching bag. But this time, the script flipped. Liberal media analysts desperately tried to downplay the damage. MSNBC's panel scrambled to reframe the moment, claiming that Holt had held Vance accountable, and that the backlash against her was just another example of right-wing disinformation. But the problem? The full clip was out. People had already seen exactly what happened, and no amount of spin could change that. CNN's Brian Stelter, who once built his career defending the media's role in democracy, tried a different approach. He admitted that Holt had struggled in the exchange, but argued that it was because Vance was using a well-rehearsed strategy of media manipulation. Vance knew exactly how to play this moment. He anticipated every move Holt would make and turned it against her. This isn't just political skill, this is media warfare. That comment raised another important point. Had J.D. Vance planned for this exact moment? Some experts believed so. Dr. John Peterson, a professor of political communication at Georgetown University, suggested that Vance's performance was no accident. What we're seeing here is a shift in how conservative politicians handle the media. The old strategy was defensive, try to answer the questions, avoid controversy, and move on. But Vance represents a new wave. He didn't just defend himself, he went on offense. He used Holt's tactics against her, controlled the pace of the conversation, and forced her into a position where she had no choice but to reveal the media's own bias. But here's where things got even more interesting, because after the media meltdown, a former CNN producer, who asked to remain anonymous, came forward with a shocking admission. I worked in cable news for years, and I can tell you, this is exactly how we were trained to handle conservative guests. The goal is never a fair debate. The goal is to put them on the defensive from the start, push them into a corner, and then make sure the audience sees them as untrustworthy. But Vance did something that most guests never do. He didn't play the game. He turned it back on the host. And once that happens, once the audience sees through the tactics, there's no coming back from it. That revelation rocked the media world, because now it wasn't just conservative commentators calling out the bias. It was people from within the industry, and it didn't stop there. Psychologists and body language experts began analyzing Holt's reaction during the exchange, pointing out key moments where she visibly lost confidence. Dr. Emily Carter, a specialist in nonverbal communication, noted, "If you watch closely, there's a shift about 3 minutes into the exchange. Holt starts with strong posture, making direct eye contact. But as Vance takes control, you see subtle changes. She leans back, blinks more frequently, and starts glancing at her notes more often. Those are classic signs of discomfort. By the time Vance delivers his final rebuttal, she completely loses eye contact. That's the moment she realizes she's lost control of the conversation. That was the final nail in the coffin. What started as a heated debate had now turned into a full-scale industry-wide reckoning, because J.D. Vance didn't just win a debate, he exposed the media's playbook, and now, people were questioning everything. Had the media been manipulating narratives all along? Were conservatives really the only ones guilty of shifting positions, or had the media just been selectively exposing them while covering for their own? The debate wasn't about one reporter anymore. It was about trust, and once that was broken, there was no going back. As the dust settled from J.D. Vance's viral takedown of Andrea Holt, the mainstream media was still scrambling to contain the damage. They tried every trick in the book, calling it a right-wing outrage campaign, pushing fact checks that conveniently ignored the full context and even attempting to shift the focus onto Vance's past statements. But there was one thing they couldn't control. The raw, unedited video was already everywhere. Millions had watched it, analyzed it, and come to their own conclusion. The more the media tried to rewrite the narrative, the more obvious it became that they were the ones playing defense now. And then something completely unexpected happened. A former producer from Holt's own network came forward with an anonymous statement that sent shockwaves through the industry. In a leaked email obtained by an independent journalist, the producer admitted that Holt was given pre-scripted attack lines to use against Vance. The plan was never to have a real debate. She was given a list of trigger questions designed to make him react emotionally. They didn't expect him to stay calm. They expected him to snap, lose his temper, and give them a viral moment that they could use to discredit him. The second that didn't happen, the whole segment fell apart. This wasn't just a media bias scandal anymore. This was full-blown narrative manipulation. The email revealed something even more disturbing. The producers had a pre-recorded post-interview panel discussion ready to air where they would analyze Vance's meltdown. The problem? He never melted down. That single revelation changed everything, because now even people who weren't J.D. Vance supporters started paying attention. The media had always denied accusations of setting up political figures, dismissing them as conspiracy theories. But this was undeniable proof. A carefully orchestrated trap had failed, and instead of catching their target, the media had exposed themselves. But here's where it got even crazier. Within hours of the leak going viral, another bombshell dropped. Andrea Holt had quietly taken a leave of absence from her show. No statement, no explanation, just a sudden disappearance. People started asking, was she forced out? Did she know about the setup? Or was she just a pawn in a bigger game? And then, just when it seemed like this story couldn't get any more explosive, another twist surfaced. An old recording from a 2016 closed-door media training session was leaked by an ex-staffer. It featured a well-known network executive explaining exactly how to trap conservative guests on air. Your job isn't to get honest answers, it's to control the conversation. Keep them defensive, ask complex questions with no simple answers, cut them off if they start making sense. If they expose the framing, pivot quickly and reframe. The audience trusts us to be the filter. Use that power. That recording confirmed what millions of Americans had suspected for years. The media wasn't just biased, it was actively engineering political outcomes. And now, they had been caught. The internet exploded. Within days, the hashtag #CarMediaExposed was trending worldwide. Even some liberal journalists, realizing the credibility of their entire industry was at stake, started calling for an internal investigation. The fallout was catastrophic. Major advertisers began pulling sponsorships from Holt's network. Stock prices for the parent company took a nosedive, and in a last-ditch effort to contain the damage, the network's CEO issued a public statement claiming that the leak was misunderstood and that the company remains committed to journalistic integrity. But nobody was buying it, because the truth was out in the open now, and J.D. Vance, he didn't just survive the attack, he walked away more powerful than ever. In the aftermath of this explosive showdown, one thing became crystal clear. This wasn't just about J.D. Vance versus Andrea Holt. It was about something much bigger. It was about truth versus manipulation, about a media machine that had grown so comfortable controlling the narrative that it never expected to be exposed so brutally, so publicly, and so undeniably. This moment didn't just reveal bias, it exposed a strategy, a carefully orchestrated, well-rehearsed attempt to frame a political opponent and manufacture public perception. But this time, it backfired spectacularly. And the impact of this moment wasn't just temporary, it sent shockwaves through the political landscape. The footage of Holt's humiliating defeat kept circulating. Her abrupt leave of absence fueled even more speculation, and the leaked insider recording became the final nail in the coffin. But the real consequences, they were just beginning, because this wasn't just an embarrassment for one reporter, it was a turning point. People who had spent years blindly trusting the media were now asking questions. If they were willing to set up J.D. Vance, how many others had they trapped before? How many stories had been manipulated? How many debates had been rigged? How many voices had been silenced? And if they were caught this time, what were they still getting away with? The illusion of media neutrality had been shattered, and the American public was finally seeing what was behind the curtain. And J.D. Vance? He didn't just walk away from this, he walked away stronger. Instead of being the target of a media takedown, he became the man who turned the tables on the very people who tried to destroy him. He didn't just shut down Andrea Holt, he shut down an entire system of deception. But now comes the real question: what happens next? Because if this moment proved anything, it's that the war for the truth isn't over. This was just one battle, and if the media is willing to go this far to silence voices they don't like, what's stopping them from trying again? Who will be their next target? What's the next story they'll try to rewrite? And more importantly, will they get away with it next time? And that's exactly why you can't afford to look away now, because this isn't just J.D. Vance's fight, it's your fight too. If you think this takedown was brutal, just wait until you see what's coming next. The war for the truth has only begun, and the next chapter is about to be even more shocking. You won't believe what they're trying to pull next, so don't miss it. Subscribe now and be part of the movement that refuses to be fooled. Because after what just happened, you know one thing for sure: the truth is worth fighting for.